Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales on Varietal Literature's YouTube channel. My name is Rory, and what we're doing tonight is we're reading old German folklore, some of which has only been very recently translated for the first time into English. And the theme tonight is really dumb and pointless reasons that people have summoned the devil or evil spirits in general, sometimes to absolutely no effect or outcome, and sometimes to terrible effect and outcome. Some of the reasons are dumber than others, and whatever. You'll stick around. We're going to go through about 5 tales. Some are quite short, some are quite long. We'll have a little bit of sound effects, some music in the background, a little bit of a fire, which I think probably doesn't fit as well in the summer, but I'm not going to change my whole aesthetic now. If you are here live, you can join us in the live chat. If you're not here live, you have an extra option, which is down in the description below. There will be little timestamps. It allows you to jump ahead to whatever story interests you the most, so on and so forth. So if this chatter, if you're like, get me past this, and you're not watching this live, then you check the timestamps. It'll take you right to the first story. The swell in this pretty song, which means I have to turn it down, unfortunately. As much as I would like to just sit here and listen to it. GS says good evening GS. Shayna Towers back again. Great to see you, Shayna. You say yay for dumb humans. Yeah, hard to find, I know, but and when I say dumb, I mean dumb, like not like slapstick dumb, but like, what? Why are you doing this? There's nothing to gain. Some of them, though, are just people that were a little bit desperate, which is the more typical story of the devil. Okay. Well, I'm going to briefly explain the story tonight. Again, if you're not watching live, you can jump ahead with the timestamps. If you are watching live, you can join in the live chat and share your thoughts on the story as you go along. I really do enjoy reading how people react to some of the weirdness of old folklore. Tonight's stories are all from Germany, and for regular viewers will be a pretty familiar collection. Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, translator Jürgen Hubert, who is a contemporary translator, I believe based out of Germany, who comes and comments and so on our works. Here, he has a Patreon, which I will have in a pinned comment below when the video is no longer live, that you should go and support, because translations like this would be impossible without him. Nonetheless, we're going to be talking about the devil. We've talked about the devil several times because the devil is a major character in many, many forms of European folklore, which is primarily what I read. So I'm just going to sort of quick notes, if this is your first time, a few quick notes about, how it works in old folklore here. So first of all, the devil is often a bumbling loser that typically loses in folklore stories, which is, I think, a contrast to more modern representations of the devil, where he's a very intelligent, nearly impossible to overcome force that often kind of wins. So that's a bit different. He's a bit of a bumbling weirdo. He does have cleverness, but it never that clever. Second, well, it is debatable the extent to how much this happens in folklore. It is likely that some of the folklore accounts tonight, the devil was not originally the devil, like the Christian devil. It was maybe originally a sort of tenacious pagan spirit. But when Europe went through its Christianization, in this case Germany, what happens is any sort of questionable characters with questionable ethics, or tricksters or spirits or whatever from pagan tales, gets translated to the devil, because a lot of pagan tales were at least frowned upon heavily, if not fully made illegal, depending on your region. So if you're hearing one of these stories and you're going, this doesn't remind me of the devil I learned in church, just maybe imagine that it was Loki or something, and usually it makes a lot more sense. I will say, though, the extent to which that happens is debatable, and I know that the translator of these works is a little more thinks it's a little overstated how much that is occurring. Third, the devil has about 1,000 to 120,000 million unintuitive nicknames in folklore. Old Goatfoot, Old Chickenfoot, or Untitled, which is Chickenfoot, Mr. Chickenfoot. There's Jan Krager Philip Grun, which I'm not even going to bother trying to explain right now, but it comes up in one of the stories. And there is the more common one that I see in the German translations, but also in other countries' translations. They have their own versions of this. God Be With Us, which I think is one of the most unintuitive names, but it basically comes down to, I mean, if you're a kid of my age, from my generation, it's sort of the Voldemort thing. They didn't really want to say his name, so they had a whole bunch of code around when they were talking about the devil. They didn't want to call him Lucifer or whatever. I think it was probably like, we don't want to attract his attention. So that's quick notes on stuff to expect about the devil that might help you understand the text. Specifically about today's stories, this is about evil spirits. Ostensibly, it's about the devil every time, though I think you'll see that in some cases it clearly wasn't originally the devil. But we're focusing here on the rather arbitrary reasons that the devil gets summoned. And of course, I'm presenting these stories primarily for entertainment. But also, I have this ongoing effort, I don't know why, to try and undo a sort of persistent myth that our modern culture has around folklore, that folklore stories are about morals for kids, or old world values, or proud principles of national pride, or whatever else people in modern times burden these stories with. The truth is, well, that stuff does come up here and there. At root, folklore tales were stories. They were bar tales and urban legends. If they were, every piece of art is interwoven with some politics at some point. But that really wasn't their goal. And I think what you'll see with these stories tonight is that these stories more reflect a natural human want for humor and curiosity about the things around you and just imagination. I think if you dig deep, some of them have a point, but not all of them. Some of them really don't. They're just sort of bar tales. And with that in mind, let's get to the stories. This music still feels loud. Turn it down more. Also going to take the fireplace down. I'm sure it in the heat of the summer, well, for most of us anyways, it's the heat of the summer. It's probably not ruining anyone's day to turn down the sound of a fire. All right. Let's give ourselves a little bit of rain. And let's get to our first story. Our first story tonight comes to us from the collection Sunken Castles, Evil Poodles, a collection of translations of Old German folklore by Jürgen Hubert, who you can support in the Patreon below. The first story that we're reading is called The Devil in the Shaft. And for me, this is the absolute dumbest reason that anyone has ever summoned the devil. It's very short. A boy told. Now that just means this is told from the perspective of a young boy or the person in the story. That's why it's in first person. My grandfather was named Frida Merton, and he worked in the mines of Klostal, together with a comrade who was named Christian. Once, Christian said to Frida, "You know what, Frida? I shall bring a primer with me, and we shall lure the devil to us." This is a bit of an unusual use of the word primer here, so just in case anybody's a little lost, they mean primer in the sense of like a primer textbook. It's not a wrong use, it's just not as common these days. The next morning, Christian indeed brought a book with him. And as they read it in the evening, there was an enormous ruckus. And a monster came up the shaft, moved to the front of the chamber door. This was the devil who had ascended the shaft. He opened that chamber door and looked inside. Well, now Christian stopped reading, and both of them looked down to the ground before them, and the devil raced down the shaft again, and it was quiet once more. But Christian said, "You know what, Friedel? Tomorrow evening I shall bring another primer. Let's lure the devil even closer to us." In this manner, Christian brought a book with him once more, and when they read it again in the evening, well, I mean, unsurprisingly, the same thing happened again. The devil appeared and stepped before Christian. He told the latter that if he could read the text backwards, which he had read forwards, his life would remain his own. But if he was unable to do so, he had to die. Well, then Christian read the text backwards, and the devil went down the shaft again. That is the end of the story. Shannon Tower says, I'm not sure there was a moral to the little bannock with feet. Not at all, was there? Yeah. And by the way, it's not like I'm opposed to stories having morals or political views or whatever else. I mean, very often these stories do have the view that like abusive power structures deserve to go to hell and whatever else, or people in them. But I'm just, if you try to ladle too much of nowadays onto these stories, they just don't bear it. GS says random is the perfect word. Yeah, very random. Now here's the thing, it kind of slips by you, but that story, it's not clear at all why they're doing it other than he wanted to impress his friends. So I'm starting with really the dumbest reason the devil was ever summoned. And that was some dude wanted to impress his friend. Co-worker in a mining co-worker. I don't think we're going to do anything quite as terribly reasoned as that. But our next story is probably the most innocuous thing. Like, it almost feels accidental that the devil gets summoned here. I have to jump around a lot today, so give me a second. I'm just going to bring it up. But this is also a shorter one. There are a couple of longer ones near the end that are more proper tales, if that's your sort of thing. I would say the first that's like has a real tale folklore kind of fable quality to it. Not fable. Fable's really specifically designed, but is the Devil Summoner, the next tale, if you aren't into the short stuff. Andrew Allenbach says, gotta show off to the bro. I mean, there are plenty of dumb things that have been done for that poor reason. That's true. Also, welcome to the stream, Andrew. Yeah, literally, Shayna Tower says, hold my beer. Literally. Okay. Our next tale also comes to us from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, which is German translations of Folklore you can support in the comment below. This one's called The Devil Summoning, and it is the most innocuous way that the devil's ever been summoned, I think. In the small hamlet of Obermachen, near Kappel, several men who were sitting together during the home garden agreed to summon the devil so that he would appear and bring them money. For this purpose, they drew a large circle on the floor of the chamber and sat down in its outer periphery and shouted with loud voices, "Devil, bring us 100,000 local coins." I don't know why local coins is the term here. Then suddenly a gargantuan lindworm, or worm, dragon-ish thing, of abominable appearance squeezed through the door. It writhed around the circle so that it surrounded the men, who had become pale with fright. And soon the God be with us, there you go, also appeared with a large chest full of money, which he put down in the center of the circle and then sat with it. Now, consider the terrible situation these pitiable men found themselves in, for they were surrounded by the abominable snake, which prevented any possibility of escape. And next to them in their middle, Satan in person sat on the accursed chest, and they already believed him to be in certain possession of his victims. They call him Satan here, so why did they call him God be with us at the beginning? I don't know. Now, the farmers of Obermachen had been able to force the devil to appear and bring them money with their summoning, but now they saw no solution for how to get rid of him again. Surely it would have been the end of them if there hadn't been someone else in the house who, to their fortune, saw the horrible situation of the deathly pale men when he stepped into the chamber. Immediately, he hurried into the village of Kappel with haste and asked the parish priest for help. Now, the parish priest speedily arrived in the chamber, quickly grasped the situation the poor men were in, and commanded the Satan to leave. Well, the latter took the chest with the money and left the house altogether with the dreadful snake, accompanied by horrible noises and leaving behind an abominable stench. While the men breathed sighs of relief and were thoroughly glad that they'd been able to escape with their skins intact this time. But later, the farmers of Obermachen never again had any inclination to summon the devil and make him bring them money. When I say this is the most innocuous, I mean it is again a bunch of drunk guys trying to impress each other. Let's be clear, the first ones were definitely drunk. It was after work, they were minors. I say that as a person who's worked with minors. But it's the most innocuous because there's no ritual to it. There's no mystery. They just go, hey, devil, money. It's like, you could do that by accident. And compared to how some of the rituals work and some of that, I'm not reading all of these stories. By the way, if you are interested in these stories, on top of supporting them on Patreon, which gets you these stories, you can also get this collection pretty soon. It's not out yet. Called Old Goatfoot. It's his second volume of Jurgen's works. It's coming out soon. I may be part of the reason it's hold up because I'm doing a reading through for it. My apologies, Jurgen. I had some family issues and I fell a little behind. But you can actually buy a collection of just stories about the devils if that's what you want pretty soon. He also has one about sort of spirits and undead called something about On the Border. I can't remember. I'm sure he will put it in the comments. Anyways. Now the next one is the first like real story. It's these other ones I would say are sort of like anecdotes or urban legends. This one is about a person who is not only lazy, summons the devil out of laziness. I mean, let's be honest. We can relate, I'm sure. But spitefully lazy. And who can't relate to some spite? So let me pull that up. I'm going to actually have a drink of water as well. There we go. Now, unlike the last two, this is not about drunk men bringing the devil around for no really good reason. But this is about spite. This one is called The Devil Summoner. Not to be confused with The Devil Summoning, which is the last story. This is called The Devil Summoner, and it also comes to us from translated by Jürgen Hubert in his collection, Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles. Let's put some wind on. More than 100 years ago, two neighbors named Hans and Peter lived in Cobbler. Both of them had inherited small but nice estates, which were quite enough for them to sustain themselves. And Peter sustained himself quite well indeed. He was a diligent and frugal man. The first one out of bed, the last one to leave the field, yard, and stables. And for these reasons, his fields grew the best, and thus he had the most beautiful cattle in the entire village. Hans, on the other hand, preferred sitting behind a mug, like booze, over standing behind a plow. I guess I lied. There's another drunk man. Whenever he stayed home, he browsed in an old book which he'd found forgotten in a corner, and which told of summoning spirits and other such infernal arts. Field and cattle were left to the care of strangers, and it was no surprise when both field and cattle remained equally lean. In this way, Hans steadily fell behind, while Peter, who had not started with more than Hans had, became more prosperous every day. And whenever Hans witnessed the full grain wagons of his neighbor, which were pulled by shiny cows with brimming udders, while his own hungry animals slowly pulled a pitiful load with great effort, a great jealousy awakened in Hans, which eventually grew into irreconcilable hatred against his fortunate neighbor. It became his most fervent wish that his neighbor should become at least as poor as Hans was. He then frequently tried to sabotage his neighbor's fortune, but every attempt failed. One day, when Hans had once worked himself into a rage over the prosperity of his neighbor Peter, he decided to seek help from the devil. He opened up his tome of magic and loudly read the phrases which were intended to force the devil into his service. And the devil, who was always close when people forget the Lord, indeed appeared. Hans, who had not quite believed that the devil would show up, became so frightened that he was at a loss for words. But when the devil grimly prompted him to speak, as he was the one who had summoned him, he quaked and shivered, but requested a tool to destroy his neighbor's prosperity without risk to himself. In other words, risk of getting caught. The devil pledged this to him, but demanded Hans promised to belong to him after 10 years had passed. Hans, now afraid for his life, for the thing that he had summoned, promised this back to the devil. And so the devil told him of an herb which he should fetch in the forest at midnight, while invoking Satan himself. Then he should throw that herb on the feed of Peter's animals, his neighbor's animals. After this, the devil vanished in sulphurous vapors. Well, Hans did as he had been told, and the following day all of his neighbor's cattle dropped dead. Peter's prosperity was completely disrupted by the loss of all his animals. His joy and his pride were taken from him, and he was so consumed by his worries that Peter died. Then Hans' conscience awoke in his heart. As he was not truly evil at his core, just my storyteller's editorial here. Yes, he was. What the hell are they talking about? How is this not evil at his core? He saw the vileness of his deeds and despised them just as he despised himself. He denied all joys of the earth to himself and pleaded for forgiveness for his misdeed on his knees all night long to both God and the soul of his now lost, deceased, and ruined neighbor. Well, finally, over constant, hard penance and good works, the 10 years had passed, after which Hans was supposed to become the devil's property. The doom-laden day had arrived at the same hour when the pact had been made. The devil arrived. And grabbed the shaking, half-dead Hans. Well then, the blessed spirit of Peter, not the saint, the dude who was his neighbor, floated down in the glow of heaven and spoke to the devil. "Begone, Satan, for you have no part of him. A 10-year repentance has erased his ledger of debts, and the Lord has forgiven him just as I have long since forgiven him for what he had done to me." Then the devil reluctantly let go of him and departed with a rumbling that for forgiveness for his misdeeds on his knees all night long to both God. Didn't change him. There we go. Sounded as if the entire house would collapse. The blessed spirit disappeared as well, after he'd gazed at Hans in a friendly manner. And after the infernal ruckus, people came running who found Hans dying, and he was only able to relate what had happened, and then he departed in peace. But even today, it is still uncanny in the forest where Hans had searched for the magical herb in the devil's name. Wolf Monroe said, did the devil arrive on a Harley? It sounded like it. Let's imagine that was the case, yes. He came from the future on his Harley. That is supposedly a snarl. I can hear a Harley in that. Okay. So that is spitefully lazy. There was summoned by you summon the devil because you're spitefully lazy. Here's the thing that makes this story, the character seems so dumb to me. If you're gonna summon the devil, why not ask for stuff? Your problem is that you're jealous that your neighbor has all this stuff, and he wastes his whole wish on just destroying his neighbor. And I know that's the point of the story. Don't need to tell me. I get it. The point is, spite is a sin, and it blinds you and blah blah blah. But still, that's pretty dumb to summon up the devil just so that you can have him tell you where an herb is so you can poison your neighbor's cattle. Is that as dumb as getting your drunk friends to summon the devil to just as a laugh? No, but it's up there. Now, the next two stories I would say are not as dumb. They're more entertaining stories. They're more classic formats of how devil stories tend to go, which is someone's in some sort of trouble and they're desperate and they make a deal in desperation that they grow to regret. The first story of that, let me pull up. This story is called The Old Mill in Klein. I'm gonna make sure I say this right. Klein-Glienicke. And it is about a man who is, let's say, incompetent and therefore runs afoul of tragedy. Comes to us also from Jürgen Hubert in his collection Sunken Castles, Evil Poodles. Many centuries ago, when the areas surrounding the Blue River Havel were still inhabited by the Slavic tribe of the Wends, the land which was beneath the waves of the ocean in ancient times was covered everywhere with forests and swamps. Every year when the snow melted, the waters spilled far out over those riverbeds. The higher elevations then rose up like islands above these waters. As there were only a few bridges and dikes, it was time-consuming and difficult to travel from one of the settlements to the next, as these were hidden and protected by the dense and deep swamped forests scattered across the regions. Now, most of the inhabitants of these lands lived off hunting and fishing, of course. Only a few turnips and other native plants were grown on their small fields. In contrast, their herds were large and found ample food on the wide moors and meadows. While planting of certain grains had spread here from the from the lands south of the Elbe River, it was time-consuming and grueling work to pound the oat and barley grains into rough flour or to mill them on the primitive kernstones. If you've never seen a kernstone, it's a big circular stone on a stationary one. You put grain between it and you go. Also, this is a pretty accurate description of how people were living at one point, by the way. During these times, a man lived on the river island of Glienicke who could fashion such devices. He shaped them with a hatchet and a knife and sold them, and in this manner eked out a living for his wife and children. Since he always wanted to make the kernstones better or more lightweight, he always spent much unnecessary time tinkering with them. Buddy, same. That's how I approach projects. And when he had finished a kernstone that was different from the conventional ones, well, nobody wanted to buy it. In this manner, he became poorer and poorer. Furthermore, His wife plagued him with reproaches about his clumsiness and laziness, which she blamed for the fact that she and the children had to starve. The poor man was very distressed and was close to despair. But one midnight, when he was busy carving a wheel, a black man stepped into his hut. As a note here, they don't mean black man in the sense that we do. Black has a different connotation up to a certain point in Europe. Sort of think of it more like black leather. Devil. But this was an evil spirit. He said that he wanted to make the poor man rich if he gave him a soul to torment. However, the man was horrified and did not want to do so. Well, so he said no. But the next month, the evil spirit returned, and he came back in the 3rd month as well. During this time, the poor man didn't succeed at anything, and he and his family almost died of starvation. But that night his wife woke up when he shouted, "No! No!" once more, and when she heard what the evil spirit wanted, she joined the two and argued on the side of the evil spirit with her own husband, saying that they should hand over a soul so that they wouldn't all die. But when the man agreed, and the evil spirit then said he wanted to have one of their 9 children's souls, well, the wife cried and wailed so much that the spirit became afraid. And when the moon rose up, the devil had to leave, or the evil spirit. But before he left, he passed his hand over the head of the woman, and then all her beautiful long hair fell right out. The evil spirit took the hair with him and said, "Just wait." Well, the following night, that spirit knocked on the door and quietly invited the man outside, led him to the mountain near Klein-Glienicke, where the large sand pit is now located. There, the spirit threw 3 ravens' feathers into the air, and soon a large storm arrived. The Klein-Glienicke lake churned, and its waves broke through the observers and the Babelsberg hill and rushed down into the Havel. And when the waters became calm again, a bright stream flew from the Destitution into the river. And then the spirit led the poor man into the stream, and to his surprise, taught him how to build a mill whose wheel was powered with water. This was the first water mill in these lands, near and far. For 3 times 30 years, no other water mill could be built within a distance of 3 roosters' crowings. And the man became very rich from it, and lived for a long time. And his 9 children, they became his assistants at this mill. But then a plague reached the lands. Swiftly, all 9 children died, and only the man and his wife survived in the mill. But since he was overcome by grief, he soon died as well. The mother then buried him next to the 9 sons at the spot where the large linden tree in front of the forestry office is located now. The lord of this land put another miller into the mill to work it, and this miller drove the mother away. But she returned to the graves at the lake every night, where she eventually died and was buried. Nobody knows. But even now, a gray old woman can allegedly be seen at night under the tall linden trees near the mill, weeping. Okay, the last one isn't so tragic. There we go. And that one, I mean, I think it's debatable how how much it is stupidity. The wife obviously is being a little short-sighted. I do like the implication that she was like, somebody's soul's got to go or we're going to starve. It obviously, she assumed her husband's soul was the one. But I do like that little detail. I do want to actually mention before I go off in anything else. Shayna says, so she became the soul the devil tormented. That's a good point. I didn't pick up on that. Good observation. I was going to say, there's a story that I've already read, so I'm not going to read it again. But when I was reading through it, it's when I was reading through it, the Jurgen's new early copy of his book, it sort of occurred to me in rereading it and then reading his commentary on it, how stupid it was as a tale. I'm not going to read it again, but I'm going to summarize it. So if you guys haven't seen it before, you can go back and read it. I begrudge to remember which one it is, but it's something Yattensee Lake, the bridge on Yattensee Lake, I think it's called. And it's about a man who, as Jurgen puts it, probably the cheapest price anyone's put on a soul. He wants a bridge to cross a lake to get to an island that has grazing land for his sheep. And the devil agrees to do it. Which means that, as Jurgen points out, not only did the man sell his soul for grazing land. No, not grazing land. He doesn't even own the grazing land. He sold his soul for access to land he doesn't own. So his sheep could eat there. Which is, I think, historically, maybe the cheapest anyone sold a soul for. Okay. Our last tale of the night is also a bit more of an involved tale. It's not as tragic. I always, if I can, try not to leave us on a down note. I'm going to have a drink of my nondescript silver can of sweetened fizzy liquid because I don't endorse brands. It's Diet Nothing. And we're going to tell a tale called How the Cobblers Escaped Destitution. Now, the problem with the tales like this is when you read as many as I do try to keep track of the stuff I've read, but my early couple of years there, I didn't. Shayna says, was it the episode of the devil being an architect? I think so. And that is actually a theme Jurgen picks up in his commentary, which is the devil is often associated with technological advancement and knowledge. But there is a possibility I've read this story before. I don't think so, but it is similar in nature to some I've read, is my point. Enough babbling from me. This one is called How the Cobbler Escaped Destitution. It also comes to us from Jürgen Hubert's translations, which you can support down in the pinned comment below. There was once a cobbler who was doing very badly. Leather was expensive and had to be paid for immediately, but the customers were very miserly and often waited weeks until they paid him for his work. In his desperation, the cobbler thought of all sorts of ways out of this situation when suddenly someone knocked on the door. "Come in!" shouted the cobbler, and the door opened, and a tall man with a dark countenance limped into the chamber. "Dear Master Cobbler," he began, "I have heard of your worries. I want to help you." Well, the cobbler found this man suspicious, and he thus asked whom he had the honor of addressing. "Well," said the Dark One, and self-consciously scratched behind his ears, "I generally don't like to mention my name, but usually people say that I am Jan Krieger from Philipsgrun." Well, replied the cobbler, Honnefout stands before me, but no matter. I am in a very bad situation, and thus I must accept help, even if it comes from the devil. I will go on with the story, but I'm sure everyone is currently wondering what the hell Jan Krieger from Philipsgruen means. So I'm just going to jump ahead to the note at the end. Means he must go to Philipsgruen or Philip's Green, which means roughly he must go to the graveyard. He will soon die. Who knows why that means the devil? I don't know. But Honnefout is Mr. Chickenfoot. Now, this I find to be a reasonable word, interjected the evil one. Now we shall quickly write up the contracts. Thus you will immediately receive 2 barrels of gold. And once this gold has been used up, I will fetch you and take you with me to hell. Slow down, dear Honnefout, said the cobbler. I won't agree to these conditions. Before I fall to you with body and soul, we shall test your strength against each other 3 times. If you defeat me only once, you may do with me what you will. But if I am the victor in all 3 challenges, you shall not have part of me for all the time. Young Krauger had always been an extremely prideful man who believed himself to be the strongest in the entire world and considered no one to be his superior. Cobbler, he said, shall not help you in any way. But if you insist on it, I shall be content with this. Now sign quickly. And as soon as the master cobbler had put his name under the document and had used his own blood instead of ink, as it is custom with infernal contracts, the evil one vanished and returned to the spot with the 2 barrels of gold in mere moments. Now, the merry life that began in the cobbler's workshop from that moment on can be imagined. By the way, if you ever see merry in a folklore tale, they mean drunk. Boots and shoes were no longer worked on in the cobbler's shop. Instead, from early in the morning until late in the evening, there was much jubilation and ruckus. And feasting and drinking and fighting and all sorts of fun. He, the cobbler, lived as if the money would never run out, but everything comes to an end, and for the devil's money, the old saying is particularly true. Easy come, easy go. The cobbler thus one day noticed to his terror that not a single gold piece was left to his account within both barrels. And while he was still racking his brains on how in the world all the money had vanished so quickly, Herr Hannefout was already tapping on his shoulder and said, "Now is the time for our competitions." Well, the cobbler thought, "Now you have to save your skin," and went outside with the devil to settle their affairs. "I shall provide the first challenge, and you may come up with the others," said Jan Kreger, once they had reached the forest. "Will you be able to withstand it if I manage to let all branches and twigs in the entire forest fall to the ground with a single strike?" "Why not?" said the cobbler. And then there was a terrible crack, so that the ground was booming and the animals ran away in sudden fright. And afterwards all branches and twigs of the entire forest rushed downwards, and in this manner the trees stood there smooth, bare, like the masts of a ship. But the cobbler had held his hands tightly over his ears and had taken care that he would not be injured by the falling wood. Now when the devil turned round to face him, he said mockingly, "With such things you might frighten children. Nevertheless, when I do the same, what you have done just now, you will not be able to withstand it." These defiance words caused a lot of worry for the devil. And he replied, "Dear cobbler, let me blindfold myself if this is going to be so horrible." And as soon as Jan Kreger had knotted the cloth around his eyes, Master Cobbler shouted, "Now it starts!" And then he took his heavy oaken knob sticks and with powerful blows fell down on the devil's skull like hail. Finally, the devil shouted, "Stop! Stop!" After only a short time. "I admit defeat in this competition. You've won the first challenge." I don't really understand why he says that, but yeah. "I've told you at the start that you would not be able to withstand me," replied the cobbler dryly, hiding his fear. And then removed the devil's blindfold. "But now it's my turn to give you a nut to crack. Look, a stallion grazes there. Will you take him on your back and carry him all around the forest?" "This is going to be a tough piece of work," said Herr Hannefout. And when he walked towards the animal, he put the two front feet over his shoulders and began the burdensome journey, for the stallion was a wild animal and struck out with its hind legs in such a manner that the devil's feet were gruesomely smashed. Furthermore, the horse weighed a lot, and it was a hot summer's day, and the sun was at its zenith. Finally, he accomplished this task and returned to the cobbler while panting and dripping sweat and was covered with dirt and blood. Look, said the laughing cobbler. This required so much toll from you, but I shall only take the stallion between the knees and travel around those shrubs without the slightest bit of effort. And as soon as he'd spoken this, he climbed up onto the steed and merrily rode around the outskirts of the forest and jumped down to the ground again at the spot where the devil was standing. When Jan Krager saw this, he opened his mouth and nose and said with a small voice, "It is true, I admit it. You can do more than I can." "No," said the cobbler. "This isn't right. A deal is a deal, and now we come to the third challenge. But since I am too strong for your taste, I shall let my small boy take my place in the struggle against you." As it happened, the cobbler had a small hare with a wooden cage. Yes, hare, as in like a rabbit. People had caught it in the spring and when they were plowing fields, and he had brought it in for a few pennies in order to raise it and fatten it up. Now, he hurriedly ran home and fetched the cage. Then he spoke, Honefout, the third challenge is a race. If you manage to catch up to my boy, then you will have won. As soon as I count up to 3, and the challenge shall begin. 1, 2, 3. And the cage was opened. And the hare was outside, and it raced across the field with the speed of an arrow. The devil raced after it like a greyhound, the dog, if you don't know, and did not look to the right or the left, forwards or backwards. His only desire was to catch up to the cobbler's small boy, and he'd nearly caught it by its long ears when they suddenly reached a wide, moor-filled ditch which was entirely covered with moss. Well, the hare, small, light and quick, passed easily over it. But the devil, heavy as he was with sin and fat and muscle, had barely set a foot in it when the flimsy covering broke apart, and he fell into the deep ditch. The cobbler only witnessed from afar how the black waters of the moor closed around the head of Jan Krager, and then everything became quiet. And no one, not one person, has ever heard anything of Herr Honefout since then, for he pitifully drowned there. But the cobbler was now freed from all of his problems, except for those empty barrels, which I'm sure he preferred to have gold in. And Andrew Allenbach says there are a surprisingly large number of European stories which start with how a cobbler is on hard times. That is true. And in several of them, fairies, house spirits, etc. appear to strike a bargain of some sort, and the cobbler usually wins. There's another version of that, which is a little more extreme, in particular in German folklore, which is smiths. And we've done some of the stories, but not all of them on here. I did almost do a smith story in this. Blacksmiths have a slightly different reputation than the cobbler, though, being clever and whatever else. Blacksmiths usually are such bastards that the devil himself doesn't want them around. I think probably my favorite story from the collection, Sunken Castles, Evil Poodles, and there's a lot of stories competing for that, remains The Smith of Mitterbach, which I have read on the channel. I don't remember what video. It wasn't that long ago, though. Which is about a smith so rowdy, so untenably uncouth, and rowdy, just such a wild child that neither heaven nor hell wants him. It's a wild story, actually. There is a lot of stories of cobblers on hard times. There's a lot of stories of single mothers on hard times, so on and so forth. By the way, I don't this is apropos of nothing because it's nothing like any of these tales. But if you're wondering what my personal favorite folktale is, although it's arguable how much of a folktale it is, because it comes from Jonas Lie, I don't actually know which one it is. He's a Norwegian author who was an author in his own right, but he also grew up around Norway, around sort of waterways and seas. And he collected a bunch of stories and retold them, and they're called, I read the entire book on this channel a while back. Strange Tales of the Norwegian Seas or something like that. But anyways, in that there's a story called Ganfin, something in the Ganfin. Show something in the Ganfin. Anyways, it's titled as like the Bag of Wind business, the man who ruined the Bag of Wind business. And the premise of the story is about a man who wants to build a boat that's more efficient so that people no longer have to buy bags of wind from a thing called a Ganfin, which fin there means Finnish. It's written from a Norwegian perspective, and in that particular era, in many eras, Norway and Finland didn't get along. So it's sort of painted as a monstrous one. But it is a love story. It is a sort of devil's deal story. It's not a literal devil. And it is beautiful. I think that's probably my favorite story I've read on the channel. Didn't do well, which is actually kind of a thing friends of mine joke about. My favorite episodes of these shows rarely get a lot of views. Which is neither here nor there. People like what they like. Anyways, if you... I do actually, by the way, have translator's notes. I just knew that this was going to run kind of long, so I'll cover them next week. But if you did enjoy the show, please... the best way to give like a, hey, good job, buddy, is to give it a like. I have no algorithm to game. YouTube is never going to push stuff like this to the front page. That's fine. I'm fine with just a small group of people listening to stories. That's what most of history of storytelling is anyways. The like button is basically, good job, I enjoyed that. If you didn't, don't worry about it. If you did, I'd appreciate it. If you loved it and you want to throw change in the cup, there is a buy me a coffee links down in the description, but you don't have to do that. Having people chat in here with Wolf Monroe and Andrew Allenbach, I hope I'm saying that right, Shayna Towers and GS, that was lovely to have a conversation and see people's reactions. I just like storytelling. I hope you guys enjoyed the tales tonight anyways. There's plenty of other Devil's Tales I'll come across, but for now, I'll keep the fire warm. You folks have a good night.